could see at least two teams missing out. Kansas City. They should have tanked for Trevor Lawrence instead of just missing out on Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase. Todd Bowles, at best, is a mediocre coach. He did the same situation with the Jets back in 2015, ultimately maliciously ruining a power-hungry Baker Mayfield and potentially Mike Evans.
Was a huge year of what could have been for the Ravens, even with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. It just felt like the biggest problem was blown leads, particularly two of them, against the Patriots and the Bills. If you reverse the outcome of those games, they win the division in that case. Seattle Seahawks, Los Angeles Rams rematch.
This is going to determine who wins the division.
Kansas City versus Cincinnati. After Kansas
That
City
was the upset of the decade.
Yeah,
between Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, this was the upset of the decade. Between LSU and Texas Tech, it's like LSU being the undefeated team. It's like Texas Tech with the Kingsbury coaching that team becoming the best. But ultimately, LSU comes out on top, which is why Cincinnati, when that field goal was made, it was an underdog story.
There's also the comebacks. 06, Indianapolis, New England. The Bears had punched their ticket earlier, and then it came time. Indy was down 21-6. It looked like New England was going to go back and win their 4th and 6th seasons. But Indianapolis ultimately came back, got the go-ahead touchdown. Then, at the end of the game, when Brady got the ball at less than a minute, Peyton had his head down the entire time because he knew Brady had enough time. But the interception happened. It's funny. All of a sudden, Peyton Manning hears the crowd roaring. He finally looks up and starts jumping up and down. Really, the incomplete pass on 4th down in the 4th quarter that ended the Rams' fairy tale game-winning drive on that 14-play drive. Ended with a turnover and downs. Good evening, folks. It is the final Tuesday of January, and that means we have our Super Bowl 60 matchup set. It went down on Conference Championship Sunday. New England Patriots won the AFC Championship, and with all due respect, somewhat anticlimactic fashion. And then the Seattle Seahawks, in a thriller, defeated their division rival Los Angeles Rams to set the Super Bowl 49 rematch, Patriots-Seahawks. But this time around, I feel like it's going to be an entirely different story.
And this time around, this is no Legion of Boom. This is no Russell Wilson. This is no Pete Carroll. Ultimately, Seattle is a completely different team with JSN, Sam Darnold. Good evening, folks. This is Agent Warrior, ex-co-host of NFL Pickems, the final week of January 27th, 2025. 26, sorry. 35 years ago, the New York Giants have taken on the Buffalo Bills in Tampa Bay, Florida. Super Bowl 25. Don't forget, this is the same year that Sonic came out, the Super Nintendo came out in 91, Aladdin came out, and to top it all off, the Redskins was the next NFC champions. Now, this championship Sunday was beyond exciting, except for the AFC championship, because it was mostly a defensive game. But the NFC side, it was a thriller. It was desperate for the Rams to try to come back, but ultimately they wasted all their timeouts. They should have challenged a play a long time ago, and to top it all off, they lost out. Congratulations to Seattle on winning the NFC. Philadelphia, hand that crown over to Seattle because the Mariners have sacrificed their lives for the Seahawks to make it back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 10 years.
And for the Seattle Seahawks, this goes to show you what well-run organizations typically have the opportunity to go for multiple Super Bowls. well-run organizations always find a way back to the promised land, one way or another. There might be stretches in between, but at some point or another, they'll find their way back. We've seen throughout the 21st century. We've seen teams like the Baltimore Ravens. They've had their ups and downs, but they've won 2 Super Bowls in that stretch. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are kind of a weird one, but they've won 2 Super Bowls in that stretch. Giants in the 2000s, early 2010s was excellent. Recent years has kind of fallen apart. The future remains to be determined. The Philadelphia Eagles with Howie Roseman have made it to 1-2 Super Bowls. And the Seattle Seahawks have an opportunity to join the Buccaneers, Seahawks, and let's not forget the Los Angeles Rams in that 2 Super Bowl victories club. But first, they got to get past the New England Patriots. Now, still got to talk a little bit about the games itself and how we got here.
Now, this was one hell of a wild card playoffs this whole month of January. Let's start with the wild card game, shall we? So the recaps wild card round all the way to Super Bowl 60. Let's start off with the first match. Los Angeles Chargers, New England Patriots. Chargers sucked throughout this entire playoff run. From a blown lead with Brandon Staley to getting destroyed by the Texans to losing to a winnable game against the Patriots, which, by the way, it was a defensive game. Again, some defensive teams make it a low scoring game. But Drake May outlasted the Chargers, sending them back home for the third time in the last 4 years. Ultimately, for the Chargers, I'm starting to think the Chargers are wasting Justin Herbert's career. So, do you know what they did this offseason? They hired Mike McDaniel as their next offensive coordinator. Tough luck, Chargers.
Well, for the Chargers, obviously, they're still snake bitten. Some teams have turned over a new leaf since the start of the 21st century. Like I said, the Buccaneers, Seahawks, Eagles, to name a few examples. Rams, technically the 99 season, but in the case of the Chargers, that's not been the case. They're still the same snake-bitten team they were in the 20th century. And for the New England Patriots, they were also that team, the most notorious example of turning over a new leaf in the new millennium. 6 Super Bowl wins, 9 Super Bowl appearances. They're about to go to their 10th. And it started by beating up on the snake-bitten team out west in the Los Angeles Chargers in a game that really wasn't all that great. But to be fair, it was Drake May's playoff debut. Sometimes quarterbacks struggle in their playoff debut and they make up for it later. We've seen that before. And so, but it wins a win. They beat the Chargers. And now there's the Justin Herbert conversation about him in the playoffs. At some point, he's going to have to step up and prove something. But
the next matchup. Oh, go ahead.
One moment, folks.
So the next matchup I'm going to talk about, the Eagles versus the 49ers. The 49ers, for the 49ers, were the most injured team in the league. This was a very winnable game for you. And I said the 49ers on the wildcard weekend preview, I said the 49ers would overcome the odds against the Eagles because their offense has a slighter advantage. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, the defense has been great, but the offense, don't get me started on that. It's been terrible in the second half. Shades of the 2023 collapse ultimately got destroyed because of AJ Brown's crucial moment. He was complaining this whole year and said he wanted more catches and more attention to make sure that he's the best player on the team. That didn't happen. He dropped 2 crucial moments. And I said you vouch for a rat of Kevin Petullo because he's a former Jets QB coach, which thank God you chopped the tail of a rat off. But it wasn't enough. A.J. Brown is now becoming a team cancer. Jalen Hurts is slowly declining. Saquon Barkley, ever since that Madden curse, is now officially becoming one of the worst players on the team. So where does that lead you next? The domino effect. The domino effect is going from Kevin Petullo being chopped off. You missed out on Mike McDaniel. You missed out on Brian Dable, who went to the Titans, and now you're about to miss out on another offensive coordinator. If the offensive coordinator situations can't get done by the end of the season, during the start of the offseason, the Eagles have been nothing more than a revolving door of offensive coordinators coaching search. For the 49ers, they advance. Eagles, they have a lot of work, which thank God you terminated an offensive coordinator, Kevin Patullo. Ultimately, you're still searching for one, and you missed out on both coordinators.
Ultimately, for the Philadelphia Eagles, it was the end of an underachieving season. And for the San Francisco 49ers, hey, it was a tale of their adversity, overcoming injuries, ultimately moving on. And they did secure a divisional round matchup against the Seahawks, but small spoiler alert, we know how that's where the fairy tale ended. But
Which is why we're going to get to that the next game after we cover the rest of the wildcard rounds.
then there's
But
the
go ahead.
AFC side of it.
Yup. The next AFC matchup, Jaguars versus Bills.
Who?
Jaguars had every advantage in the books in terms of the offense. The defense has been doing great, but if Travis Hunter stays healthy, he would have been a dynamic duo of defense and offense with Travis Etienne and Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram. Ultimately, it wasn't enough. Cam Little may have been the best kicker of the season, but after all that time wasting with no timeouts, they missed a field goal, and Trevor Lawrence was picked off at the last moment. Ultimately, Josh Allen overcoming the odds, but Keon Coleman has been a very disappointing receiver throughout this playoff year. Most of the time, he knows how to do his job, but Cam Newton was right about one thing. He's cool, all right, but what they're supposed to be his number one, and he's playing like a bum. You better start doing your job.
Man, for that game, man, that was definitely the more entertaining game for the AFC side of it. And credit to the Jaguars, they put up a fight for sure. There were points during the game it looked like it could go either way. But ultimately, the Buffalo Bills decided, hey, there's another team that had one Super Bowl since Josh Allen joined the league. They decided to borrow from that team's playbook with not one, but two tush pushes for the go ahead touchdown. First, they did kind of like a longest yardish type tush push where you had a bunch of people pushing the pile forward till Josh Allen got to the one, kind of like that play where Turley AK, the great Kali, wouldn't go down. You had guys pushing the pile. And then they did their own rendition of the Eagles tush push at the one. Hey, if it works, why not use it? And it worked. They got the go-ahead lead. Defense got the crucial interception, and they got the win. I mean, for the Jaguars, look, it was a good season, hell of an effort, but come playoff time, it just wasn't enough. Now, as far as Trevor Lawrence goes, I understand Drake May's not in the Pro Bowl, but if we're looking for a fill-in, Trevor Lawrence would have been a worthy fill-in alongside Justin Herbert and Josh Allen. I'm just saying.
Which
Because,
is why nobody should be talking about the Pro Bowl because the Pro Bowl at this point is a popularity contest. And Shador Sanders, by somehow, some way, replacing Puka Nakua to a Pro Bowl selection is the most inexplicably and inconceivably the worst case scenario for a rookie quarterback.
huh,
Which is why the next game I'm going to go over for the NFC side, the Packers and Bears. Oh boy, where do we begin? First, I want to say that it's Chicago's first playoff home game since 2018 and that double doink. Should Iceman tr- should Iceman Caleb Williams redeem himself? Absolutely. But he ain't no Frozone because he is the zone, which is why they started off terribly. The Packers were running over. The Packers was destroying the defense of the Bears defense. Ultimately, at the first half, they were cruising. But then the second half came, everything fell apart. The cheese grater, the cheeseheads known as the greatest cheeseheads in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, has officially choked at the worst time possible. You were up 21-3. Ultimately, you choked. And Iceman Caleb Williams has officially came back for revenge for the third time and destroying the Packers. Now, where does this lead to this offseason? Simple. Jeff Hasley went to the Dolphins. They hired the former Packers GM is now on the Dolphins. They hired Jeff Hasley. Jeff Hasley's now on the team. Now, where does this lead to? Simple. They need Michael Parsons back healthy, Josh Jacobs back in his normal ways with the Raiders, and they need to improve on the offense. But there is no excuse for you to blow a lead like that. And because of that, the Packers have officially been eliminated in the first round in the most heartbreaking way possible.
Yeah, and for the Packers, that game was perfectly fitting of their season. There was a point in time, just for a week or so in December, they had the number 1 seed. And it looked like they had a shot of finally making a run back to the promised land. But once that Micah Parsons injury happened, the Packers collapsed, barely made the playoffs to the 7th seed, which is exactly what happened with them in this game from their point of view. They started off strong, only to collapse and go home one and done. But on the other hand, for the Bears, this was perfectly suited to their season. The comeback story, the Caleb magic, all season long. And then you saw Caleb became this close to being the first 4,000-yard passer for a season in Chicago Bears franchise history. But it was good enough for the number 2 seed, and their performance late was good enough to turn it around and win this game. Now, as you'll notice, Caleb Williams didn't have the greatest run in the playoffs, but it was his first season in the playoffs. There's still plenty of time. Like we said before, and Drake, there have been quarterbacks who struggled their first go in the playoffs, but made up for it with winning Super Bowls later on down the line.
Which ultimately the Bears, in the very next round, we will get to in a few short moments. And then there was one AFC wild card.
Ooh.
The Texans versus the Steelers. Aaron Rodgers' potential final game as a Pittsburgh Steelers and the greatest quarterback in 2004. Ultimately, for the Steelers, this wasn't enough. Sure, Calvin Austin may have done his part, but Aaron Rodgers looked terrible in the playoffs. Like Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, they have officially lost almost every single one and done situations. Mike Tomlin, despite winning the North, despite multiple playoff appearances, ultimately, it wasn't enough. The Texans defense was elite. CJ Stroud was amazing. CJ Stroud was the greatest quarterback in the wild card round, but we'll get to the divisional round in the next few moments. Because after that, what happens? The Steelers lost. They lost because the defense wasn't showing up, in spite of TJ Watt. It wasn't enough to score more offensive points, and the offense wasn't good enough. Now I know a lot of Steelers fans want Mike Tomlin fired, but he wasn't. He stepped down, resigned as head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers after 19 years of his head coaching experience. So don't say that he got fired. He resigned. So where did this lead the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason? They let one of their second or third stringers go to the Giants, one of the players. And this week, just recently, they hired Mike McCarthy for the Dallas Cowboys. My honest thought, you went from a 9-8 Super Bowl team to an 8-9 mediocre team. If this team goes 8-9 next season, this would come to an immediate halt as the Pittsburgh Steelers will be tied for the 49ers, New England Patriots, and the Dallas Cowboys for most consecutive winning seasons. If this happens, forget it. I don't know what to say, but I think, in my opinion, it was a bad move.
I mean, with this one goes for Pittsburgh, it was perfectly fitting, not necessarily in regard to the way the end result of the game because it was not favorable, but it kind of was like the telltale sign that it was time for Mike Tomlin to step down. He had a great run, but toward the end, he kind of got stagnant, repeatedly being a wild card one and done. And after going out in the wild card round again, it was kind of, I guess you could say, God's way of giving Mike Tomlin the heads up of, hey, you had a great run. Maybe it's time to step aside and let somebody else take over. Go enjoy some family time or whatever he ends up doing in the future. Maybe he just needs a break before he returns to coaching. Maybe he goes into broadcasting. But so far, he's showing that he wants to take some time with his family. He went to his daughter's gymnastics, the support event to support her. So he's deciding to take some family time. And for Aaron Rodgers, I guess for him, it worked out kind of, if this is his farewell, this would actually work out perfectly fitting. He said on Pat McAfee's show during the offseason, he wanted to go out in a way that was more fun than his tenure with the Jets. He didn't say it directly, but that's kind of what he implied. He went to Pittsburgh, made the playoffs, which was a step up. And, you know, at this stage in his career, that was realistically the best we were going to get of Aaron Rodgers. So I think that would be the perfectly fitting farewell at this stage. It may not be another Lombardi, but at this point, he'd probably be more likely to go off on a more embarrassing note if he were to just try to come back. So I think he should just go out. For the Texans, hey, this was the elite defense on display. I mean, the game itself really wasn't that interesting till the fourth quarter when the Texans defense put the dagger in Pittsburgh's heart and kept the magical winning streak going one more week.
Here's a bonus: Rams versus Panthers.
Yep.
This was a close one. I have a gut feeling for years to come, if Carolina plays well for the next couple years, they have a shot to not only win the NFC South for years to come, but also be a future playoff contender. If Bryce Young has more weapons besides T Mac, besides Rico Dotto, besides the players that they have, I think the Panthers could win the NFC South for years to come if Bryce Young gets his cards right. They're one step closer to winning the division for years to come. Now for the Rams, this was no brainer. Puka Nakua was amazing. Everybody else was amazing. But ultimately, the Rams overcame the odds.
Hey, if there was ever one time, this was probably the only time that a team under 500 who won their division had a feel-good story to it. Because the previous times, like with the Seahawks, that just felt like a joke. The Panthers, the previous time they did it, when they went from 12-4 to 7-8-1, big step back. The Bucks, that final year of Brady, it felt like Tom Brady played 1 year too long when he could have went out on a better note the previous season. But in this case, considering how bad the Panthers had been for years, just to see them get to 8 wins and actually play respectable football was a bit of a breath of fresh air as football fans to see it. It was nice to see Bryce Young, after looking like a complete bust his rookie year, actually play good enough football to make the playoffs. Say what you want to say about how they got there. And you actually have a solid receiver for Young to work with, it looks like, with McMillan, if I'm pronouncing it correct. And you got a solid defense, too, who pretty underrated. But the Rams, with Matthew Stafford playing at a potential MVP level, depending on how that voting plays out, Puka Nakua and that Rams team was just too much for the Panthers to handle. Ultimately, the Panthers get credit for putting up a good fight, and there's actually hope for the future considering they have a young roster. But in this case, the Cinderella run came to an end. The Rams move on to 2 more thrilling games.
And then the wild card was done, The eliminated teams will have a lot of work to do in the offseason. On to the next one, the divisional round. Let's start off with the Texans and Patriots. WTF? What the frick? Texans had every advantage in the books in terms of the elite defense this whole year. CJ Stroud may have been terrible in playoff situations, but he just can't get past the second round in the playoffs. And you're telling me CJ Stroud has turned over the ball 4 times against Drake May and the Patriots? Really? Normally, Ohio State is only good for both college football and basketball, but sometimes football quarterbacks like these sometimes really disappoint at best. I'm starting to think that CJ Stroud is compared to Warren Moon, most talented quarterback in the franchise, but can't get the job done in second round or one and done situations. For the Patriots, Drake May did his part in the second half, and there was no shock. What a waste of a defensive team that is.
Wow. I mean, this is probably the most anticlimactic game where the score actually indicates a competitive game, but if you look at the way the game played out, this was not as exciting as the final score would indicate because the Texans blew so many opportunities. There were so many turnovers that were costly. If you eliminate some of those turnovers, you could literally flip the result of those drives from turnovers to points. It's an entirely different game, possibly an entirely different outcome. But for the Texans, the magical run came to an end. The CJ Stroud jinx took over and took over in horrific fashion. And in the past couple of weeks since, the narratives are forming that he peaked as a rookie, which remains to be determined. But just the fact that these are coming out, these narratives are even forming, goes to show you how ugly this performance was. And for the Patriots, Drake May, I mean, it wasn't great, but he took advantage of some of the short fields his defense gave him, threw enough touchdowns for the Patriots to ultimately beat out the Texans and move on to the conference championship and help with the quickest rebuild in NFL history. So, shout credit to the Patriots. They did enough to play, ugly or not. They made the least mistakes, and ultimately, they won the game as a result. So, credit to the Patriots.
Which is why the next divisional game will be the second AFC matchup between the Broncos and the Bills. This was the Buffalo Bills' time to go back to the AFC Championship like they did last year. There was one problem at this time around: no Chiefs, no Ravens, no Lions, no Eagles either. 4 teams have officially cast away thanks to the boogeyman. The boogeyman has officially cast away those 4 teams, and they have officially need to get the job done. But guess what? Josh Allen played horrible in the first half. That one pass he did, throwing it to the other side of the ball, was like was like NFL Street type of play, but nobody was there. That's got to be one of the dumbest plays I have ever seen before the half. Not only that, but similar to what we saw in the divisional round, like the Cowboys and 49ers, was one of the most dumbest plays at the very end. Having Zeke as a center, Dak Prescott throwing the ball to Devontae Turpin, knowing that you could have just run the ball and just hook and ladder, you could have done that. But ultimately, the 49ers will get to in the next couple moments. But because the fact that the game went to overtime was absolutely amazing for both teams. But ultimately, the way I see it, this was an immediate shocker. How do you go from beating the Ravens in the divisional round last year to losing to the Broncos? You lost to the Chiefs, and you can't beat the Texans. I call it the four horsemen of playoff apocalypse. The Bills can't get past the Texans because the defense is too elite. The Chiefs, Groundhog Day. Well, they can't beat the Chiefs. It's similar to like the Yankees versus the Astros, like the Yankees can't get past the Astros since 2017. The third horseman is the Bengals. That upset in 2022 was amazing, but ultimately destroyed in the 2022 AFC Championship. And now, this year, the Broncos. Death Judgment Day has arrived for the Buffalo Bills. The reason why I say that is because of that blatant miss pass interference call on Keon Coleman, and it was intercepted at the last moment, ultimately gave the kicker a game-winning field goal, sending to the Broncos for the first time in over a decade when Peyton Manning was on his last legs. Ultimately, the Bills took a second round exit. What did they do this offseason? Simple. They fired Sean McDermott as a scapegoat. But none of it wasn't really his fault, though. And what do? They hired, they promoted Bean as a president of operations for the Buffalo Bills, despite his bad drafting with Keon Coleman. And the final nail in the coffin is Joe Brady as the next offensive coordinator, next head coach for the Buffalo Bills. What a way to kill a Super Bowl caliber team in one fell swoop.
Interesting. And we talked about Warren Moon in the recent game, but if there's a modern comparison, Josh Allen fits that bill more because he's been in the league long enough. He's had at least 6 different opportunities to make it happen in the playoffs, and each time they fell short, not even making a Super Bowl. Kind of parallel to what happened with Warren Moon with the Houston Oilers, where they had an excellent team. They had plenty of chances, but they just couldn't get it done. We know about Kansas City, but then there was also Cincinnati and now Denver. In this one, a lot of Bills fans blame the call in overtime. And that is a factor, but also 2 more factors come into play. The slow start in the first half, down 20-10. Now, to Buffalo's credit, they managed to tie the game by the end of the fourth quarter and take it to overtime. However, when you consider it was tied at the end of the fourth quarter, you realize if Buffalo would have scored more points in the first half, they could have won in regulation, and it would have been an entirely different story. But ultimately, they didn't. 3 turnovers in the game. You can't just solely blame one bad call for that. And for the Denver Broncos, hey, Bo Nix, like I said, he's like an enigma. One week, he has this excellent performance. Next week, he has a Tebow-ish performance where somehow the team finds a way to win. And in this game, Bo Nix showed up in his form that drew the Broncos front off his eye, particularly got Sean Payton behind him. Now,
And
unfortunately, though,
then
Bo Nix
there
got
was the
injured, and that
injury.
meant he was going to be out for the AFC Championship game, which played a huge factor in that one. And for Denver, ultimately they move on, proving that Kansas City wasn't the only problem for Buffalo. Now, it was Sean McDermott's judgment day because ultimately he got booted, fair or not. Now, McDermott deserves some of the blame, but I don't think he was the only problem.
It should be Bean that should be gone, not McDermott. McDermott is not they fired the wrong person. They fired the wrong person because they think he takes all the blame, but it wasn't his fault. The players sometimes can't do their job. Like Cam Newton said in his podcast, he said, "You're supposed to be our number one, and you're playing like a bum. You better start doing your job." But ultimately, they're now realizing that Keon Coleman was a mistake, and they could have taken Xavier Worthy. And then what happens, Nikki? You guessed it. Bean was promoted to president of operations for whatever reason, despite his bad drafting. And this might be the most, I pretty much lost a billion brain cells because of that. How do you go from firing a head coach who made Josh Allen a caliber MVP, like who won last year, to this? Now you're entering mediocrity for years to come. And again, this was one cruel way to kill a Super Bowl franchise, Super Bowl caliber team in one fell swoop. This year was different for Buffalo, right? It started with promise, it ends with death. The AFC East will piss
And
on their graves like they always do.
with Sean McDermott, you got to wonder, ask if you ask fan bases of struggling teams if they would like to have Sean McDermott as their head coach, like say Raiders fans or Bills fans or Jets fans, you best believe all three fan bases would raise their hands and say they would like to have Sean McDermott over what they've had in recent years.
And then the very next NFC divisional matchup, Seahawks, 49ers. One NFC West divisional matchup. Civil, this game, in my opinion, played the way how the Eagles played against the Giants in the 2022 divisional round. Boom. Blowout. BTA. Rashid Shaheed with a returning touchdown. Very first play of the game. It's like saying you're conceding a goal in the first 10 seconds. That happened. But now this time around, with Sam Darnold doing amazing and the defense doing their part, I'm not going to waste any further. Ultimately, the 49ers have a lot of work in terms of the free agency. They might cut Brandon Ayuk. You might let Juwan Jennings go. And that's pretty much it. I can't believe they just wasted a season with one CMC.
Unbelievable. It's very amazing you bring that up because that was the first sign that this Seahawks defense doing something in the playoffs. They shut down Christian McCaffrey and made him inefficient. Because Christian McCaffrey, with all due respect to George Kittle, Brock Purdy, he's the best player on that offense when he's healthy. And the Seahawks shut him down. He had no answer for that defense. And then from there, I mean, the 49ers didn't have George Kittle to fall back on. Everything else fell apart. And when you have that dominant defense, pretty easy for the offense to get going from there and score enough points to win the game. And that's exactly what happened here. The rest of the offense was calm, composed. They had a great defense behind them. All they had to do was just simply outscore the 49ers, which they did, and root to a blowout. I mean, the offense didn't have to play that great, but they dominated, which actually may have helped them out because it may have built momentum for the NFC Championship game, which ended up being a shootout. So all the cards worked out perfect in Seattle's favor to dominate the Niners. And sometimes all you need is that momentum to go forward. And that's exactly what the Seahawks got in this one. And they carried it over. But first, they had to sit back on Sunday and watch the Rams and the Bears to find out who was going to Seattle to play them.
And let me tell you, in the fourth quarter, prime quarter, clutch quarter, Ice Man Frozone Caleb Williams came through again. And he came up short in the overtime. Defense did their part, offense did their part, but ultimately, Caleb Williams fumbled at the worst time. Not going to waste too much time on this, but Bears got a really good team for years to come.
I mean, hey, the Bears, like you said, fourth quarter, the touchdown that tied the game, that was peak 2025 Caleb Williams, who's given the Bears the first real spark at quarterback for the longest time. And they did play a good game against a Rams team who for the second straight year had to travel into the winter weather in the divisional round. But this time around, the Rams got a favorable outcome. And even with that interception in overtime that Caleb Williams threw, it wasn't the worst throw in the world because at first it looked like he had a chance. But Cam Curl made a great diving play at the ball to get an interception that not every defensive player in the world would have been able to make. So Cam Curl deserves credit for getting the pick to set up the Rams for the game winner in what was truly the best game of the divisional round. So congratulations to the Rams on getting the win and setting up a game with the Seahawks, which ended up being a classic. And for the Chicago Bears, hey, realistically speaking, you kind of had a feeling it might fall off in the playoffs, man, but it was a great run by Ben Johnson. And now you see how valuable he really was to that Detroit Lions team. But the good news is the Bears got Caleb Williams entering his third season. They got a coach that's finally got the locker room behind him and plenty of reasons to look forward to the future for the first time in a long time. And oh, yeah, Rashid Shaheed. I know this was off subject, but his kick return in the game against the 49ers was a theme that we saw from Shaheed throughout the playoffs, which I'll get to more when it comes to the NFC Championship game about how he helped set the tone.
Which is why the next one is the AFC Championship. Broncos hasn't made it to the AFC Championship since 2015. The Patriots hasn't made it to the AFC Championship since 2019. Two teams, one championship. Ultimately, it was a low scoring game. Then it snowed. Patriots was dominant. With Jared Stidham on the Broncos, ultimately destroyed. And congratulations to the New England Patriots. Since I'm a New York Giants fan, we know how to beat them twice in the Super Bowl. But my props gotta be given to the team the only team to beat twice in the Super Bowl. Now, Drake May, in my opinion, has to win MVP this year. With Mike Vrabel potential play coach of the year candidate, I'm going to say that
Definitely.
in my opinion, Drake May would win MVP automatically. And Mike Vrabel, now they got his first year at the Super Bowl, automatic coach of the year. The empire that we once knew was dead, but now it's resurrected, not as the first galactic empire, but the first order, which is why the next game is the Seahawks and the Rams. The Rams was by far the greatest ending we have ever seen in a long time. Matthew Stafford should could have done better, but ultimately it wasn't really his fault. Sean McVay should have used that challenge a long time ago, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Ultimately, it wasn't enough. Because of that, they lost. Seattle, for the first time since Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, and the Legion of Boom, have won the NFC Championship. The Seattle Mariners have ended their ALCS drought for the first time since 2001. They sacrificed their team, the heart of Emerald City, to to the Seahawks with Sam Darnold and JSN. The final stage is officially set. A lot of teams didn't want this Super Bowl to happen. A lot of people said that this wasn't supposed to be happening in terms of cupcake schedules and controversial outcomes. But the fortunate side about it, you're going to love it. And I'll tell you why for one good reason for the AFC side, the New England Patriots. For the first time since the Brady era, before getting his sixth championship time with the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Patriots were nothing more than a trash team after trash team after trash team. Ultimately, for the Patriots, before Mac Jones was departed, they had to go through Belichick's drafting, and Robert Kraft decided to pull the plug off Belichick becoming a head coach and general manager, ultimately giving the keys to someone else. When Drake May entered the Patriots, he actually looked pretty solid in 2024 season, but none of it was really his fault. Jared Mayo at best was a coordinator, but Robert Kraft replacing Jared Mayo to replace Belichick has got to be the most inexplicably inexcusable with hiring possible. But then enter Mike Vrabel, a former New England Patriots player and do a Tennessee Titans head coach. Tennessee really messed up big time when it comes to teams like these. After casting off Vrabel in a power struggle, and they terminated Rank Carthon, and ultimately hiring Robert Sala and Brian Dable as their offensive coordinator. This, in my opinion, Tennessee might be in a competent run clown show. So New England not only has to thank Tennessee for their incompetence, but also being such idiots. Unfortunate, but here is the fortunate part about New England. Stephon Diggs finally got a Super Bowl appearance. After being part of the Vikings, after being part of the Texans, and being part of the Bills with Josh Allen, it wasn't enough. But then when the daylight came in for the New England Patriots, and he's still dating Cardi B, by the way, which is disgusting. And ultimately, the Patriots found their way back to relevancy. Christian Gonzalez is amazing. The defense, amazing. But their opponent waits for years to come. But however, the NFC side, for the first time since the Legion of Boom, is back. Seattle Seahawks. Rematch of the Super Bowl 49, rematch of Super Bowl 49 in Arizona. But this time around, it's a completely different team. Sam Darnold has officially become the first quarterback in the 2018 draft class to make it to the Super Bowl. Now, the real question is he going to win it? We may never know. JSN looked amazing. They have two former Giants, Julian Love and Leonard Williams, to the Seattle Seahawks as NFC champions. Clint Kubiak has officially become the best coordinator head coach they ever had. Ultimately, for the Seahawks, they have clawed their way since Geno Smith departed and traded to the Vegas Raiders. But ultimately, Pete Carroll, when they terminated him, they got a whole lot better without him. So, in my perspective, Seattle is by far the most feel good story so far in terms of Sam Donald's career. He started his career in SEC, at USC, same college that Caleb Williams came out. Ultimately, he's now in the Super Bowl. So now, between those two, if I had to choose one, I'm not going to jinx anything, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Seattle Seahawks. Second championship for the first time since the Legion of Boom in MetLife. It is destiny written all over it to take down the evil empire that you botched a play at the 1 yard. Instead of just giving it to Marshawn Lynch, you decided to pass it, instead of just running it. And because of that, the Legion of Boom has been disbanded because of Pete Carroll's questionable play call. That's about it. So, Nikki, if you have anything left, the floor is yours.
With these two teams, you got the Seattle Seahawks are the perfect example of why you need, on particularly with their defense, why a mix of veterans and young players is crucial to helping a defense succeed. Because you got younger pieces like Kobe with a C Bryant. And while we're on that name, rest in peace to Kobe Bryant, the NBA legend. His 6-year anniversary was yesterday. So rest in peace to Kobe Bean Bryant. You have Kobe Bryant with a C. You got Witherspoon, who was somewhat of a hero on that Rams almost miracle game-winning drive late in the NFC Championship when they came up with the fourth down stop. Witherspoon played a key role in that. You also got guys like DeMarcus Lawrence, who brings that experience factor, who's DeMarcus Ware all over again. And by that, I mean, after being a key force in the Cowboys defense for years, he goes to a new team and gets to experience a Super Bowl run there, just like DeMarcus Ware did with the Broncos. But you still got some key young pieces on that defense too. And not to mention, speaking of defense with the Patriots, we're seeing a lot of young players from that Patriots defense that looked like bust when Belichick was there actually start to pan out, which the more I think about it, shows you Belichick still does have an eye for talent. I just think his coaching style is a bit dated and the Patriots just needed a fresh voice and a fresh coaching style to get the best out of them. Talking about guys like Christian Gonzalez, Marcus Jones. But not to mention, you also got the addition of Milton Williams, who's playing in back-to-back Super Bowls with the opportunity to join LeGarrette Blount, Chris Long, Deion Sanders. And I feel like there's one more I'm missing that played for the Super Bowl winning team back-to-back years. But that part's conditional. The point is both teams had good defenses. The offense. Sam Darnold's a reminder that QBs alone do not win games. Because we saw, if that were the case, Sam Darnold would have still been the Jet starter. But obviously it's not the case. He's now got a complete team around him. Kenneth Walker, let's not forget about. JSN, Cooper Kupp's added some depth. Rashid Shaheed, who helped set the tone on the opening kickoff in the divisional round, and the 60-plus yarder in the conference championship, setting up the touchdown. Sam Darnold's fresh off the game of his life in the NFC championship game to get them there. Not to mention, you also have guys like Byron Murphy, Witherspoon, like I said. You also got guys like Julian Love, You got a pretty solid all-around crew. But ultimately, I feel like the Seahawks are the better all-around team, and it's going to show in the Super Bowl. Because the Patriots, with all due respect, not to take anything away from them, but they've shown their vulnerability throughout this playoff run despite their wins. And I feel like that vulnerability finally catches up with them against the Seahawks, who are the most complete team they've played. But the beautiful thing about it is we get two teams who I did not expect to even come close to this stage. I thought Patriots would maybe at best mid-first round pick going into the season, into 2026 draft. Seahawks, Darnold, I wasn't sure about. I thought maybe they'd be kind of in a similar spot they've been the past couple years where they're on the cusp, but no, they get home field advantage and make the run all the way to the Super Bowl. But that's the beauty about football. Sometimes you get those teams that make surprise runs to the Super Bowl, win or lose. We've seen a lot of them. And in this case, we're going to get one surprise Super Bowl winner and one team that made a surprise run to the Super Bowl but fell short regardless, because I don't think a lot of people saw either team getting this far.
Now let's talk about Super Bowl commercials. This is a bonus, by the way. We already know before the Super Bowl Sunday happens, we have a lot of Super Bowl commercials. For this year, we have movies that's coming out later this year, like Supergirl. Supergirl is going to get a Super Bowl ad. Avengers Doomsday is going to be getting a Super Bowl ad, which, by the way, is going to be the most anticipated film of this year. And I say the best for last. Super Mario Galaxy movie. That's going to get a Super Bowl ad eventually. We already know what happened to the Nintendo Direct of Super Mario Galaxy when they revealed Yoshi. They revealed Yoshi. They revealed Baby Mario, Baby Luigi. They revealed Birdo. If you saw the Direct, I can name every single Mario character that's part of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, including Bowser Jr., which we saw earlier. But I think, in my opinion, the best one has to be Avengers Doomsday. We already know State Farm's getting a Super Bowl ad. We already know that Pepsi's getting a Super Bowl ad. But there's no big surprise about Scream 7. The seventh Scream movie is coming out the next month of February is getting a Super Bowl ad. Now, the funniest Super Bowl ad, in my opinion, has to be the Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. dance. This has to be the most hilarious Super Bowl ad, in my opinion, one of the greatest. And at one point, there was an ASMR Super Bowl ad with a with a beer sponsor. Have you ever seen anything like that, Nikki?
No, there's always, hey, that's the fun part about it. There's always those unique commercials. And then sometimes we even get tribute commercials, or there was even the one time, this may have been a Super Bowl. It was when years ago when Apple was starting to break out. It had kind of like this commercial where it was like kind of like a reminiscent of the George Orwell novel 1984, where all the brainwashed sheep are cheering on the idea of it. That was kind of a interesting commercial, but in hindsight, it's weird because Apple ended up being one of the most innovative brands in the business world and plays a crucial role in everyone's life.
Which, by the way, speaking of Super Bowl ads, the best I think the best Super Bowl ad has to be the McDonald's Super Bowl ad with all the Twitch streamers and celebrities being part of the McDonald's ad. I can only predict it's going to be the exact same thing like they did a couple years ago with the Chiefs or 49ers or Eagles and Chiefs. But ultimately, I'm going to put it this way. If I had to choose the now let's talk about Super Bowl memories because we have a lot of things to say about Super Bowl memories. This is the final topic, by the way. Last but not least, Super Bowl memories. Let's look back at Super Bowl 42. Almost 20 years of Super Bowl 42 when when we when the Giants played the Patriots, when the Patriots was undefeated. And yes, Mike Vrabel was part of that team, by the way. They started out as an underdog season. The Giants went through against the Buccaneers in '07. They went to the divisional round against the Cowboys final year at the Cowboys Stadium before moving to AT&T Stadium in 2009, ultimately destroying the Packers on Brett Favre's last year. And for the Giants, they have came into Super Bowl 42 against the Patriots. Resilience was one key word that the Giants need to defeat the Patriots. The Patriots were the dominant team, the first undefeated team since the '72 Dolphins, ultimately going back to the Super Bowl for the first time in a couple years. Then came the War Horses, two legendary rivalries. You had the Patriots scoring first, then the Giants scoring. Then the Patriots picked off Eli Manning, fumble. A lot of things happened. And then the one greatest play of all time is the greatest, the helmet catch. Eli Manning, 3rd and 5, stayed on his feet, should have been tackled, should have been tackled, should have been tackled. 3 times he should have been tackled and sacked. But he airs it out in midfield in the fourth quarter. And David Tyree on one of the most impressive catches we have ever seen in our entire lives, which, in my opinion, haunted the Patriots fan base even further because the fact after the helmet catch, Tom Coughlin used his final timeout. And then came one game-winning touchdown. Manning to Plaxico Burress against Ellis Hobbs. Touchdown, New York. With 2 seconds left, Tom Brady had to give it all out. But ultimately, defense wins championships because of Jay Alford, Michael Strahan, and Antonio Pierce, which ultimately crowned the greatest underdog story in NFL history. Giants win 17-14. And Michael Strahan came retired as a champion. And he called it too. He made a guarantee saying, we're going to beat the Patriots 17-14. And that's how the New York Giants became the greatest underdog team of all time in the Super Bowl.
And it's crazy because the original underdog story involved a team that has shared the stadium with them for years, the New York Jets. Now, this was historic, though. At the time, supposedly the champagne bottles were already delivered to the Baltimore, now Indianapolis Colts locker room because everyone assumed they were winning that game. People weren't giving the Jets a chance. But turns out Joe Namath, who up to that point had struggled as a professional, had his best season since his days with the Alabama Crimson Tide in college, and it was good enough for the Jets to pull off the Super Bowl win and pretty much paved way for the AFL-NFL merger, which had a domino effect on football as we know it. Because remember, prior to that, the first couple Super Bowls, it was the NFL champion versus the AFL champion. Super Bowl I, Green Bay Packers NFL champ, AFL champ Kansas City Chiefs with Hank Stram as their head coach, Len Dawson as their quarterback, Now, every Super Bowl, you'll always find something interesting, either because there was one great play, a great game, or a special moment. Super Bowl one was special because it was the very first Super Bowl. Super Bowl three special because it led to the original great upset that paved the way for the Giants and set up the AFL NFL merger. You had Super Bowl 15, Jim Plunkett, the first great underdog backup story. Ironically, this started the downfall of Dick Vermeil's tenure as Eagles coach, but coincidentally, a Super Bowl years later pretty much saved his legacy in Super Bowl 34 when the Rams entered the season with no expectations, except maybe at best a playoff run with Trent Green. But then Trent Green gets injured. Everyone thinks it's over. Vermeil's going to get fired. But Vermeil says we'll rally behind Kurt Warner and play good football. Everyone thought they were crazy, but instead they did exactly what Dick Vermeil said they would do, and they won their first Super Bowl. And that leads to the story of many teams that surprised everyone by either making a Super Bowl run or falling short or flat out winning the Super Bowl.
I'm going to put it this way to say that last year's Super Bowl, it was straight a blowout, similar to the Buccaneers during the pandemic and the Ravens and Giants, because the Ravens defense back in 2000 was elite. Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, best defensive players in the game. Kerry Collins at one point did his part, but in the second half, straight blowout. Shannon Sharp was amazing. Baltimore won their first Super Bowl as their first expansion team since, since the Arizona Diamondbacks, which, by the way, this year celebrates 25 years of the Arizona Diamondbacks winning their first championship against the New York Yankees in 7 games.
And
The next Super Bowl I'm going to mention, you can go ahead before I continue.
there was interesting. There was a stretch where there was four straight first-time Super Bowl winners. The Rams, the Dick Vermeil, Kurt Warner story. The Ravens the very next year. The Patriots, the Brady Belichick dynasty started, and much similar to Dick Vermeil, Bill Belichick saved his job with that miracle run. And then the Buccaneers against the Raiders, where John Gruden, yeah, if you're playing your former coach, you might want to change your playbook up a little bit, especially if that coach was recently part of your coaching staff. And that was the first of two Buccaneers Super Bowl blowout wins in their franchise history.
And then became the next thing I'm going to mention is the Giants back in 1986. The 1986 Super Bowl between Denver versus New York. The Broncos with John Elway and the Giants with Phil Simms. Don't get me wrong. The Broncos have made back-to-back Super Bowl appearances between the Giants and the Commanders. Or should I say the Redskins before the Commanders. The Giants defense was elite. No question about it. The defense with Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, Harry Carson, Leonard Marshall, that defense was elite. Phil Simms was amazing. And then enter the 1990s, where Phil Simms was hurt in the NFC Championship against the 49ers. Ultimately, Jeff Hostel did their part. And then 35 years later, we watching one of the greatest Super Bowls between the Battle of New York. Ultimately, the Giants won their second Super Bowl thanks to one person, Scott Norwood, which is why Scott Norwood, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be treated badly. I just honestly feel sorry for Jim Kelly and the defense. And Jim Kelly played his part, but ultimately Scott Norwood messed up at the worst time. Then enter 91. They played the Commanders. 92, Cowboys. 93, Cowboys. They lost to three NFC East teams. I would be shocked if the Bills and the Eagles actually made to the Super Bowl that year, in the coming years. But ultimately, the Bills can't beat the NFC East. Period. Then enter the early 2000s you mentioned earlier. You mentioned the Patriots dynasty with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. You mentioned the greatest show on turf against Tennessee. You did not mention the one game against the Steelers and the Seahawks. The first Seahawks Super Bowl back in 2005. Ultimately, this was Jerome Bettis' final year as a Pittsburgh Steeler. Yes, they may, yes, Mike Tomlin may have entered in 2007, but we'll get to that later. That Steelers offense with Big Ben, Jerome Bettis was amazing. And because of that, the Pittsburgh Steelers became champions. Enter and ultimately retiring Jerome Bettis in his hometown that he grew up the most, Detroit. And then we mentioned the Giants and Patriots, an upset. And then became one final underdog story. No, it's not the Carolina Panthers. It's not the Denver Broncos. It's not the Green Bay Packers. New Orleans Saints in 2009. Drew Brees, Sean Payton, amazing against Peyton Manning. Ultimately, for the Saints, they have done amazing and they got their first championship for the Saints in the NFC South. So we got two underdog stories. The Giants in 2007, which, by the way, is the greatest upset in Super Bowl history over the Jets and Colts back in 69 before Neil Armstrong went to the moon. The number one greatest upset is the Giants and the Patriots 2007.
And with the Super Bowl, where teams are desperate to win that game, sometimes teams might have a special trick play they've been saving, or they might become desperate and pull out a trick play because they know there's no tomorrow. The New Orleans Saints did that. The first half, Peyton Manning had a pretty good first half against them. They knew giving the Colts the ball back and them scoring could be devastating for momentum. So what did the Saints do? They decided to get a little tricky. Borrowed from the 2000 Philadelphia Eagles, who did it in their season opener against the Cowboys, where they pulled a trick play and went in for an onside kick the Cowboys weren't ready for. The Saints, 9 years later in the Super Bowl, did it there. And they got the ball, marched downfield, scored some points, completely changed momentum of the game. And then Tracy Porter, one of the heroes of the NFC Championship game, officially sealed a deal after the Saints scored the go-ahead touchdown with a pick six on Peyton Manning to make it a two-score game and complete the greatest natural disaster redemption story in professional North American sports, with the Saints winning Super Bowl 44. And speaking of tricks, the Philadelphia
And
Eagles
not
in
just
Super
that,
Bowl.
this was a dedication after Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005.
And then Super Bowl 52. It was Eagles-Patriots. You already knew as the first half was winding down, this was going to be one of those close games that was going to come down to the finish. Even with a whole half to play, you knew it was going to be close. And the Eagles knew it too. So they decided, fourth and goal, yeah, they could have kicked a field goal and gotten easy points, but they knew the Patriots were going to come out roaring in the second half. So the Eagles, with Doug Peterson, Nick Foles, to their credit, they had a trick play they had obviously been practicing, but were managed to keep secret even in the social media era until it came time for that fourth and goal. It's known as the Philly Special. Similar to what Tom Brady tried a few years earlier, he faked an argument with one of his receivers, but this time it worked out differently. It was Corey Clement who took the snap, then lateraled it to the third string tight end, Trey Burton, who then threw to Nick Foles, who ran kind of a basketball route because Foles did play football and basketball in high school and college, and that basketball experience came in perfect to catch the Philly Special, which ultimately did help win them the game in an 8-point game by the end. So ultimately, it's one of those plays that when all the cards are on the line, you take the opportunity, and if you succeed, it works out in your favor. And it's a play that will forever be the title of the game. Like you get some plays are remembered by a play. Minneapolis Miracle, 4th and 26. Super Bowl 52, the Philly Special, which kind of started the big turnaround for the Eagles over the past decade with 3 Super Bowl appearances and 2 wins.
Since the Philadelphia Eagles made it to the Super Bowl last year and before years, the Philadelphia Eagles are 2-3 in the Super Bowl. Lost to the Raiders, lost to the Patriots, and lost to the Chiefs. You redeemed yourself against those 2 dynasty teams, but couldn't beat the Raiders in the 80s. Now, on to the final Super Bowl memory. No, it's not the 2011 Giants and Patriots. Super Bowl 51. Matt Ryan versus Tom Brady. 28-3. Dan Quinn was the head coach. Matt LaFleur was the QB coach. Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. But ultimately for the Falcons, they were leading in the first half. We get that. A lot of Patriots fans turned the TV on because they think it was a blowout. Ultimately, come the second half, they didn't run the ball. What happens then? They choke. They started to choke and choke and choke away the lead. It was down 28-3. Now you're down by 1 score. What happened? They scored and they tied the game. Enter after the first ever after hours overtime in the Super Bowl. The New England Patriots versus the Atlanta Falcons. If only Julio Jones would have kept his toes, said his knee was down, they would have still won the game. But ultimately, the Falcons choked at the worst time possible. A pass interference call against the defense. And what happens after that? Brady gives it to his man. He's in. Patriots win the Super Bowl. First ever comeback victory against the Atlanta Falcons after leading 28-3. Great, and I kid you not, Nikki. This was by far the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. And since the Falcons in championship moments have squandered most of the time, they squandered against the Broncos and they squandered in the NFC Championship. Ultimately, when it's their time back to the Super Bowl, they choked. They lost. And since then, after that Super Bowl choke, Atlanta sports hasn't been the same except for the Atlanta Braves in 2021. They had 0 championships in basketball, 0 championships in hockey, 0 championships in football, and only 1 championship in baseball. That's it. Nothing else. Atlanta
Matter of
sports will
fact,
forever be known as one of the most historic, heartbreaking franchises in American history.
the hockey curse was so potent they disbanded the Atlanta Thrashers and resurrected the Winnipeg Jets. But speaking of old times, there was a memory from Super Bowl 10, first Steelers and Cowboys battle. The Steelers won 21-17, but this Super Bowl showed that sometimes the MVP, the most valuable player of the game, doesn't always have the flashiest stats. They don't always make the flashiest plays, but they make the key plays that win their team the game. Now, sometimes the MVP is a guy like Nick Foles, who has multiple touchdown passes and a touchdown receptions. But then, like Super Bowl 10, it's a guy like Lynn Swann, who only caught 4 passes, but in those 4 catches had 161 receiving yards and a 64-yard touchdown in it. And considering they won 21-17, those 4 combined receptions were enough to play a key role in Pittsburgh. And there was even another play where he made an amazing diving catch on one of the other scoring drives to get Pittsburgh into Dallas territory to score a touchdown. So Lynn Swann's role with the touchdown reception and the huge catch to put him in territory in another scoring drive were key catches that ultimately helped the Steelers beat Roger Staubach and the Dallas Cowboys and become the most valuable player, even with only 4 catches. It was the magnitude, specifically of 2 of those catches, and the role it played in the Steelers winning that Super Bowl that made him the MVP. So one thing we remember is sometimes the MVP may not always have the flashiest stats, but they make the key plays. That's why some people even think maybe Michael Strahan should have been the real MVP of Super Bowl 42 because of the significance of the pass rush. But that's another subject for another time.
But instead, it's Eli Manning, which, by the way, Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Now, if you want to talk about backup quarterbacks winning Super Bowl MVPs, Nick Foles is one of them. Nick Foles, Jeff Hostetler, and the Ravens backup. That's it. Everything else, I'm going to say, speaking of championship rivalries when it comes to Super Bowl, the World Series, Stanley Cup, or NBA Finals, you can name Steelers Cowboys, Super Bowl, Dodgers Yankees, World Series, Celtics Lakers, NBA Finals, Canadians, and I could say the Maple Leafs, but not by a long shot. But all I'm going to say is that Super Bowl 60 is upon us, and Bad Bunny is performing this year's Super Bowl halftime show. And my honest thought about Bad Bunny, he's a really good Latino artist, I'll kid you not. But ultimately, I think it's gonna play out like it always does. But if you want to talk about best Super Bowl halftime performances, I can name you 3. The Weeknd, Kendrick, Dr. Dre, Eminem, and Mary J. And the final one I'm gonna say is Kendrick Lamar. Straight up Kendrick.
And some other memorable halftime shows. You had Michael Jackson at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, brought his aura and his amazing talents to the stage. And speaking of pop artists, Super Bowl 41 is not most remembered necessarily for the Colts winning, but at halftime, what seemed like a curse in most instances, where it started raining at halftime, actually was God creating a perfect plan. Prince was getting ready to do Purple Rain, meant the lights in the stadium changed to purple, and it started raining just in time to create a magical movie-like scene with Prince performing that song with the purple with the purple lighting while it was raining. It was only fitting that we got that moment.
God bless the dead for Michael Jackson and Prince. Now, for the mid tier of Super Bowl halftime performances, I'm going to say the mid tier will have to be Bruno Mars, Beyonce. Don't get me wrong, I like Beyonce and Bruno Mars, but I don't think it wasn't enough. But Katy Perry is another one too in the mid tier. Not as great, but not as good enough. Destiny's Child, I completely understand, but not really. Yes, I understand Destiny's Child is one of the greatest trios since the late '90s and early 2000s. But if you want to talk about bad Super Bowl performances, Travis Scott, Maroon 5, and Justin Timberlake, that was by far a terrible Super Bowl performance. But if you want to talk about best ones, you said Michael Jackson. You said Prince. I said Kendrick Lamar, Dr. Dre, Snoop, Eminem, and Mary J. And I said The Weeknd. The Weeknd is another one, in my opinion. Not because he used to sing his hit songs like Blinding Lights during the after hours, or Call Out My Melancholy, Call Out My Name, or better yet, Can't Feel My Face. Which, by the way, Can't Feel My Face is another good one.
And there was a lot of we had some in his halftime shows. A lot of the old time rock and roll artists, it seemed like they got to him a little too late. Like Tom Petty and The Who. They got them several years past their prime and they just didn't deliver good shows. But the one old rock and roll guy that actually seemed to actually be entertaining and engaging was Bruce Springsteen. He may be an acquired taste musically, but he was able to at least get people to pay attention and actually sounded good during his set. That was
You know what
another
would be amazing?
interesting one.
You know what would be amazing for future Super Bowl halftime performances? Besides
Metallica.
Bad Bunny, yes, ACDC, Guns N' Roses. No, no, it's not Ice Nine Kills. But I could say old school rock and roll artists. Metallica, ACDC, Guns N' Roses, Green Day. Green Day is another one.
And we've seen Green Day perform at an NFL stadium before, so we know they can deliver. They did it the night that they returned to the Superdome for the Saints. So we know they can perform in an NFL stadium.
Will be another great rock artist to perform. Linkin Park. That's another good one.
It would be interesting. Unfortunately, it'd be interesting to see how their new singer would sound at that stage, doing all the classic hits like Numb and In the End, if that ever were to happen.
What about One Step Closer? What about Points of Authority?
I mean, Super Bowl halftime show. I'm trying to, you know what they could? They could incorporate maybe they could incorporate Busta Rhymes and do We Made It, or have Mike Shinoda do one of his verses from Remember the Name from NBA Live 06 from his Fort Minor band.
Yep.
Or even you could get Jay-Z to join them.
It would be amazing
that collision course.
It would be amazing if Jay-Z does a Super Bowl halftime show in the future. And I wanted this one badly because this year celebrates 30 years of Reasonable Doubt and his hip hop career debut in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of moments, both good and bad, throughout Super Bowl halftime show history that stand out. But we've learned that a lot of like newer school pop acts generally, most of them don't really work out as well. Sometimes you might get some good ones, but sometimes, well, ultimately depends on who you have. You got to make sure, really, you got to look at their live performances and scout artists by how they do live before bringing them to a Super Bowl halftime show.
In my opinion, if Super Bowl announces a new artist for like every year's Super Bowl halftime show, Billie Eilish, in my opinion, is a strange choice. In my opinion, I'm not saying it's bad, but in my opinion, it's strange. Sabrina Carpenter, no. Taylor Swift, no. Who else is another pop? Don't make me laugh and say another pop artist. Don't make me laugh and say another pop artist. But I'd rather see rock, metal, alternative, hip hop, R&B, and of course, pop. Only the old school pop though.
And generally, throughout Super Bowl halftime history, those usually work out better. Even like when Aerosmith did that show with Britney Spears, Aerosmith being there kind of helped the show a little bit. So
I forgot about Aerosmith.
So, yeah, we've had a lot of interesting halftime shows. We'll have to see what happens here. And it's interesting because you got two teams, like we said, who sometimes make that surprise run just being in the Super Bowl, whether they win or lose. Like we've seen a lot of them. Like we said, the Rams in 99, Giants 2007, Eagles 2017. Hell, Panthers in 03 with Jake Delhomme, Steve Smith and company. Just making it to the Super Bowl was a shocker. The Bengals in 2021, just being there was a shocker. The Falcons in 98 against the Broncos.
And only two of those underdog stories you mentioned were the Eagles and Giants. Those were two underdog stories in 2018 and 2007. 2011, I can argue say 2011 was a underdog story, but that was a little tank division with the Eagles, Commanders, and Cowboys were terrible.
Right, 2007 was actually a much more competitive NFC East.
Exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was a record-breaking show of about 1 hour and 25 minutes. See you all on Super Bowl Sunday. I am your co-host, Agent Warrior X. Until next time, goodbye, my friends. Have a good night, everybody, and enjoy Super Bowl 60.
And it is your boy, Nikki Stee, signing off. Thanks as always for Agent Warrior X to joining me. Let's try to enjoy this week, and let's have a fun Super Bowl 60. May the best team win, and we'll be back to recap it. Have a great night, everyone.